Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every week and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Parsha is Vayetze. In a week where indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas, mediated by Qatar and with pressure from the public and the U.S., have appeared to have reached a tentative and partial hostage deal, although as we speak, it's been postponed till Friday, we explore what, according to Rabbinic tradition, was the first instance of an anti-Israel campaign and its resolution. Is this a model of how we deal with our neighbors with whom we disagree? What are the lessons to be learned? So join us for conflict resolution. Well, welcome back, Rabbi. I missed you last week.
But you had Rabbi Stav, and I listened to it, and it was remarkable. So it was really interesting to hear his view about what's going on in Israel. And you're right. I mean, I spoke to people today. They're so anxious for the hostage deal to actually happen because there's no trust on either side, obviously, and they just want it to happen. And now it's pushed off for a day because there's another day of anxiety awaiting.
It's anguish, it's anxiety, it's, this numbing effect of when you're in almost a Kafkian situation where it never ends. And it just, I can just imagine as I was driving home, I was listening to CNN and it was supposed to be tomorrow morning. Now they've pushed it off to Friday morning. Just imagine what it's like to be one of the families of these hostages.
There's no way to know what condition the hostages are in, whether it's actually going to happen. I mean, it's so scary and horrible.
Absolutely. And this week's Parsha, the segment that you picked and the subject matter that you picked, it's not life or death necessarily. There are no real hostages, but as I read it, it has that numbing effect. It just goes from counter move to delay to swindle. It really does resonate, I think, to the feeling of this week.
I think it really does. And that's why I actually want to share a Dvar Torah that I heard from Rabbi Riskin over 40 years ago. He looked at this parsha and he saw in it kind of the relationship between Jacob and Laban as a model of how you deal with not an enemy, but how you deal with conflict as neighbors, but then the ability to potentially separate. And what I want to look at is I want to look at the story. I want to read the story the way I heard Rabbi Riskin read the story many years ago. So what happens is, of course, that Laban tricks Jacob and he gives him the wrong wife, and then he tries to trick him again and to take away all his gains, all his flock, and Jacob gets him back, and he somehow engineers that the flocks are speckled and striped, so he gets the flock. But he says to his wives, Jacob, that it's time to go. And that's, I think when you talk about conflict resolution, sometimes it's just time to go. I've had enough. And the Torah says in verse 21, and he fled with all that he had. Soon he was across the Euphrates and heading towards the hill country of Gilead. Means he ran away. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days, catching up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Now, at this point in the story, you're not exactly sure what Laban is going to do. Does Laban want to run after him to punish him, or does Laban want to go after him to bring him back? You have no idea. But God appeared to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad." Laban overtook Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent on the height. And Laban with his kinsmen encamped in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What did you mean by keeping me in the dark and carrying off my daughters like captives of the sword?" Means, why'd you run away? Why did you flee in secrecy and mislead me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive music, with timbrel and lyre, which means I would have made you a party. You did not even let me kiss my sons and daughters. And then he says, "Goodbye. It was a foolish thing for you to do. I have in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father's house said to me last night, beware of attempting anything with Jacob, good or bad. Right, Geoffrey, that kind of rings true. Like, you don't know, is there a deal? Are they going to harm one another? You're not sure. When you're dealing with the opposition, you really have no idea what's going to happen. Very well, you have to leave because you were longing for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered Laban, saying, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But anyone with whom you find your God shall not remain alive. In the presence of our kin, point out what I have of yours and take it. Jacob, of course, did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So they stole his idols. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tents of the two maidservants, but he did not find them. Leaving Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel, meanwhile, had taken the idols and placed them in a camel cushion and sat on them. And Laban rummaged through the tent without finding them. For she said to her father, let not my lord take it amiss that I cannot rise before you, for I am in a womanly way. Thus he searched but could not find the household idols. Now Jacob became incensed and took up his grievance with Laban. Jacob spoke up and said to Laban, what is my crime? What is my guilt that you should pursue me? You rummaged through all the things that you have found of all your household objects. Set it there before my kin and yours, and let them decide between the two of us. These 20 years I have spent in your service, your ewes and she-goats never miscarried, nor did I feast on rams from your flock. That which was torn by beasts I never brought to you. I myself made good the loss you exacted of me, whether snatched by day or snatched by night. Right? That's what he says to him. Listen, you've tortured me. So he says, I was scorched, heat ravaged me by day and frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. Of the 20 years that I spent in your household, I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages, and again, time and again, 10 times. Had not the God of my father's house, the God of Abraham, and the fear here's the key. Had not the God of my father's house, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac been with me, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But it was my plight and the toil of my hands that God took notice and gave judgment on last night. So Jacob says that the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac were with me. Then Laban spoke up and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All that you see is mine. Yet what can I do about my daughters or the children they have borne? Come then, let us make a pact, you and I, that there may be a witness between you and me. Thereupon Jacob took a stone and set it as a pillar. And Jacob said to the kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a mound and partook of a meal by the mound. Laban called it Yagar Sahaduta, but Jacob named it Galeed. Now that's amazing. Rabbi Riskin said that, look at that. They have 2 different names for the place because that's how you show possession of the place. Laban said, this is my place. He gave it his own local name. But Jacob gave it a Jewish name. There's this kind of battle between the two of them, right? It means, are they making a deal? Are they not making a deal? Are they going to stay together or not? This is all about how you deal with 2 people who are neighbors but are in opposition to one another. And Laban declared, this mound is a witness between you and me this day. That is why it was named Galeed. And it was called Mitzpeh because If you ill-treat my daughters or take other wives besides my daughter, thou no one else, about Mender, it is God will be a witness between you. And basically, they just finished this up. And Laban said to Jacob, here is this mound, and here is the pillar which I have set up between you and me. This mound shall be witness, and this pillar shall be witness that I am not to cross to you past this mound, and that you are not to cross to me past this mound and this pillar with hostile intent. This, Geoffrey, is a demilitarized zone. Basically, this stands in the middle. You're not going to cross to my side, and I'm not going to cross to your side. Meaning we've had a lot of years together, and we've been fighting with one another. Now we need a demilitarized zone, a zone that's not going to be crossed. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nachor, their ancestral deities, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. See, Laban says, We're all the same family. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Laban is the grandson of Nahor. Abraham and Nahor are brothers. He says, we're really brothers. And Jacob says, no, we're not. He swore by the fear of his father Isaac. He says, we're not, because we broke from you, and therefore we're not really family anymore. Jacob then offered a sacrifice on the heights and invited his kinsmen to partake of the meal. After the meal, they spent the night on the heights. How do you break up? How do you have a neighbor who's in opposition and then, he wants his family, right? You share family. And Jacob says that there has to be a break between us. You say that we're all the same family, but I say that that we're not the same family, that we've separated from one another. And I think what I always felt in this story is you feel the tension of what it's like to have a neighbor who's also you're in conflict with. And again, here you have it, like you said, you have a negotiation and you don't even know what the negotiation is exactly. But at the end, Jacob says, I won't have any more of it. I need to go on my own way. And I think that's really a very powerful kind of thing. This parsha, I'll just say it starts with the dream of Jacob. Jacob goes into a hostile environment, and the angels are there to protect Jacob. And this has always been a model of a story of how Jews manage in a hostile environment. And you see here that sometimes when you're in a hostile environment, at the end, you just need to be able to separate yourself from Laban. So that's my story, and that's where I want to start today.
So I think you definitely could look at this as a partnership dissolution. It happens in business all the time. People go into business. If there's an inequality, if one has the capital and the other one provides the brains, the creativity, or the labor, when you dissolve, you have problems. Then you multiply that by 10 when you're dealing with family. And I think you have all of those ingredients here. You have the familial relationship. He married the boss's daughter, so to speak. He created all this wealth. And there is what makes it so real is that if you follow the long story where there are tests and you make the striped animals and those are yours and you talked about that kind of technological solution, it's either side kind of is talking with a smile. I was so nice to you. I gave you a business when you had none. It rings so true because you're frenemies. You're not enemies and you're not friends. And you're trying to break up and you have the added complication of having wives, daughters in common, children, the future in common. And as you say, if you follow it till the end, there clearly is a clear break, a delineation, a border, a demilitarized zone, as you say. But you do wonder if it's resolved because they are still family. But I think what really intrigues me is that I really could read this as a simple case study in a partnership dissolution. I would say, you want to know what the takeaway is? Don't go into business with family. Don't do a partnership where you're unequal in terms of, you could draw many, many conclusions. But, and I brought this quote from the Haggadah. This is the case study of Lavan was trying to kill our people. And then B'chol dor v'dor omdim oleinu. Somehow the rabbis saw in this more than a business dissolution. They saw in this, as you were saying, this kind of deep-seated, generational conflict that, in a sense, will never go away. What do you think made them make that leap?
That's you made the point, and that is it's all about family. I was actually studying the parsha with someone earlier, and I made the point that the entire book of Breshit is about family conflict, right? It's not only this story. Last week, we had Jacob and Esau fighting with one another. And then in a couple of weeks, we have the brothers who are going to be jealous of Joseph, and they're going to actually sell him to Egypt because of this family conflict. So isn't the whole book about resolving family conflict? In a way, this is one example of the way that you resolve the conflict. Actually, if I would say it better than that. And I would say there are two models. One is this model, and one is Joseph and his brothers. The story of Joseph and his brothers actually concludes with a reconciliation. Here you have a breakup, and that's what you said. There are two ways. There could two ways it can work out. Now you said never go into business with your family means that you eventually you're going to break up. But when you see Joseph and his brothers, actually they reconcile with one another.
You know, I love when you brought up the fact that they both have a different name for this mound of stones. You know, it's very rare in our Bible, in the Torah, that you have translations. And this is one of the singular cases where you have a gal saduta, which means in Aramaic that the stone should give witness. When you talk in the Talmud about witnesses, you call them sahadi, and then it says gal aid, which is the Hebrew word. But what I think, as you intimated, what it really means is that two people can see the same situation and give it a different name, and they can see it totally differently. And I think the traditional way that I've always read this story is in a bigger context. You know, when we think of Jacob, we think of stealing the blessing in his youth, of not being exactly straight. The name that his parents blessed him with means crooked. I mean, who calls their kid crooked? But the bottom line is there are those who read this as midah keneged midah. In his youth, he fooled his father. He put on a lambskin, Yadayim Yidei Esav, V'kol Kol Yaakov, that sort of thing. And this is payback. But I think the beauty of what we're doing today is we're reading it in isolation. And I think if you read it in isolation, no one would wish upon somebody what is happening to Yaakov, a guy who dedicates 14 years of his life to building up a business for someone else, creating prosperity, happiness, and wealth, and then wants to leave. He's had enough. He has his own identity. You can see it through the eyes of Yaakov, but I challenge us to read the whole story from the beginning through the eyes of Laban, because we project so much onto him as well. And here's this guy, he brought Yaakov into his house. He was in exile. He gave them not one daughter, he gave them two daughters. You know, you really do see the most basic, essential elements of conflict. I think the difference, though, is that in this particular case, they were able to resolve it. You know, it wasn't a case of two peoples on one land, so to speak. They were able to make that differentiation. But I get back to my question about how come the rabbis saw this in so much grander, bigger terms, into such existential terms. And as I said as we were talking about the different sources, I said I have to bring in this piece from the Haggadah that says in every generation they come after us, because I have heard so many interviews of Israelis on the street, not religious Israelis, but they know that phrase. And they really just look up, as you can imagine Yaakov throwing his hands up after in his mind doing only well, of some of the people that were killed who used to take Palestinians to hospitals, people that wanted coexistence in life. And they just say, my God, in every generation, this is what we have. We're going to have to be a fortress state. It rings so clear from that. And maybe that's what I think the rabbi said. You know, I said in the intro, it's the first case of anti-Israel. You know, Yaakov changed his name to Israel. And so there is this also this conflict of the old Jew and the new Jew, and how would the old Yaakov take it? He kind of walked out with his tail between his legs, and how would Israel take it? It's all there, and that's why I think maybe the rabbi saw in this something so much larger than just a dissolution of a partnership.
I love that. And of course, we always say that the book of Genesis, of Breshit, is actually two parallel train tracks. There's the personal stories of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then there are the national stories. And that's what we have here. There's the personal fight between Jacob and Laban, but this represents something much bigger. And that's what you pointed out, that the rabbis need to see it in the bigger context, because that's what the whole book of Breshit is. It's a model for a much bigger context.
The other thing that struck me is this whole subplot of Rachel and her teraphim and the idols. Of course, when Laban said to Yaakov, "Why did you steal my idols?" Yaakov didn't know that his wife had stolen the idols, and in a sense, Laban caught him in a lie. And I was watching interviews this week of the spokesman for the Israeli army, and one of the interviewers was just pounding away at one inaccuracy by one army spokesman that came out. And you could make that even larger. You could say, we have a moral army, but we make mistakes. And of course, it's going to be that mistake that is going to be kind of exploited and blown out of proportion. And it just struck me that you have this case here where Yaakov was standing on the high moral ground. He ends up by giving sacrifices literally on the high ground. But there were things beyond his control that weren't exactly right. None of us is completely pure. And even that gets us into kind of the muck. One of the last source that I gave is one that has intrigued me for so absolute long, and it's this sense of Yaakov's name as crooked. And there is a verse in Isaiah that talks about what will happen in the end of days. And he says, "Let every valley be raised, every hill and mount made low. Let the rugged ground become level and the ridges become plain." Basically, what he's saying is that the crooked path, the crooked way will become straight. And there's amazing Kli Yakar that I discovered only recently that says the following: when we left Egypt, we had to lie. We said to Pharaoh, "We want to go sacrifice for a few days." That wasn't true. When Yaakov had to leave, he had to play all of these games with the striped animals. He had to go down to the level of a Laban to get out of there. And the Kli Yakar says what the prophets are saying is, in the end of days, and I would add, and only in the end of days, can you be completely yashar. But unfortunately, until then, we have to deal with the devil. We have to make deals with Hamas to get out hostages. I understand that there were some members of the government, the messianists, I call them, who don't want this deal. They think that you can stay yashar, but we unfortunately live in a crooked world. And I think that also is part of the lessons here, and maybe why it rings so true, especially to me.
You're 100% right. But how about the other thing? And that is that Lavan's name is Lavan, is white, and he's anything but. Right? Means that, he's a trickster. But he gives himself the name white, meaning pure, because that's part of the trick. When you meet him, you say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Pure. You must be pure." But that's part of the way that he tricks everybody.
So I was definitely thinking about that, and one exception, and we have to assume that Lavan and white means pure and great. The Talmudic term for embarrassing somebody is malbin pnei chavero.
You know why it is?
Because
it makes you turn white.
The blood drains
it makes
out.
You turn white.
The blood drains out of your face. So I totally, I think there's, like all these names, there's such profound messaging in it. But you could definitely argue that the chutzpah of this guy to claim all these things and to put up his hands, it almost comes out of Casablanca, where he says, I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked that you could do this to me. I've been so good to you all these years. It's really a wonderful, beautiful case study, and it's so well written.
Right. You rarely have in the Chumash such a long conversation between two people. You know, the Chumash gives you a little piece of conversations, but here it goes on for 30 verses, and they're back and forth and back, exactly what you said, negotiations, and you're not quite sure whether Laban wants to befriend him. All of that is, and that's really a tricky thing. Now, I brought a source where I'm just kind of coming to the end, but I brought a source, which is, the rabbis throughout history had a lot of problems with how to deal with our neighbors, right? In a sense, they never trusted the neighbors, even the good neighbors. And the Chinuch says, the Chinuch lived in the 1300s in Spain. In southern France, in Provence. And he says the commandment of love of Israel, to love with love of your soul each one of Israel, meaning to say that we have compassion for an Israelite and for his money, just like a person has compassion for himself and his own money. Look at that. It says that you only have to love people from Israel, meaning that there's a tension about what our relationship is to the other. Now, God forbid, that doesn't mean that we're allowed to hate people who aren't Jewish. All it means is that the specific mitzvah to love, to go beyond the call of duty, that's limited to the Jewish people. And I think right there in that little line of the Chinuch, I think you see the tension that lived throughout history in what our relationship is with the opposition. We talk about redeeming hostages. There's a whole history in Jewish history about hostages, because in the medieval period in France and Germany, one of the ways that the authorities dealt with the Jews when they didn't like the Jews is that they would take they would take a Jew, put him in prison, and they would ask for a ransom from the Jewish community. And the most famous case in history was the Maharami Rutenberg, who in the 1200s was taken. He was the most important Jew. He was like the chief rabbi of Germany in the 1200s. And they put him in jail and they wanted money. And the Maharami Rutenberg says, don't give them money. That's a bad precedent to give them money. Don't give them money. And he died in jail. So, even that, the relationship with the other and how you deal with that. Now, of course, that's easy when what they want is money. Now they want something much more than that, right? Now they want their own prisoners who are criminals. They want them to be freed. So in a sense, I wish that all they would want is money from us. But you see that these kinds of things repeat themselves. That's what's so rich about Jewish history. The good things repeat themselves, and the difficult things repeat themselves also. And that's, I think, what you see in the Chinuch and that story about the Maharami Rutenberg.
Yep, and so it's very sobering that there's no happy ending. And but on the other hand, maybe the truth hurts, but that means you have to take off those glasses and glazed eyes and deal with it. And I think that's ultimately what Israel is going through right now. It's the new reality, and we're all just going to have to. I think what the segue to what you just said for me is, if it doesn't go away, then we have to stick together. Then we need unity. And so I think that I see the love of Israel less as exclusionary and more as intimately powerful, that we only have ourselves and we need to stick together. We need our unity. So maybe that's one of the messages that we can take from this.
I think that's a good message. I think when we want to conclude with a positive message, that's a nice positive message to conclude with.
Fantastic. Well, Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for picking
Shabbat
this
Shalom.
wonderful...
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy
This was a
Thanksgiving.
good topic, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week, hopefully with good news and hopefully with families reunited with one another.
Shabbat Shalom. Amen.